Recently, I constructed an argument for why the Day of the Lord, the Millennium, must begin after the 7 trumpets, which I should be making a video on soon. But the crux of the argument is that the resurrection of the 2 witnesses, being at the 6th trumpet, must take place prior to the Day of the Lord, the Millennium, in order for the 2 witnesses to be included within the reign of believers during the entirety of the 1,000 years, the Day of the Lord. This, and the fact that there are some internal evidences for the 7th trumpet, being the moment that those who remain alive at the coming of the Lord will be transformed into their imperishable bodies, and then raptured into the clouds, all makes for a strong case that supports my own interpretation. Recently though, I noticed that there is further internal evidence for this position. This support is located within the book of Joel. There, the prophet details, among other things, that there are events that will take place before the Day of the Lord, the Millennium. One strong refutation for pre-tribulationalism comes from this book, where Joel states that the sun and the moon will go dark before the Day of the Lord. The sun will be turned to darkness, and the moon to blood, before the coming of the great and awesome day of the Lord. Joel 2:31. Typical pre-tribulational theologians struggle to reconcile this passage with their own views because, truthfully, this is a refutation of pre-tribulationalism. For more on this, I recommend checking out Alan E. Kirshner's material, which I'll leave a link in the description below too. I don't always agree with Kirshner, but on this matter, he is one of the best for understanding the issues with pre-tribulationalism. Interestingly though, the book of Joel on multiple occasions speaks as if the day of the Lord is yet to arrive, that it is near, like in Joel 1:15, 2:1, 31, and 3:14. And while I do think that there are components of the book of Joel that speak directly to the day of the Lord, like in Joel 2:2-27, it is easy enough to distinguish between when the day of the Lord is near and when Joel is referring to events within the day of the Lord. The transition from speaking of the day being near and the events that transpire within the day is exemplified well in Joel 2. Blow the ram's horn in Zion, sound the alarm on my holy mountain. Let all who dwell in the land tremble, for the day of the Lord is coming. Indeed, it is near. A day of darkness and gloom, a day of clouds and darkness. Like the dawn overspreading the mountains, a great and strong army appears, such as never was of old, nor will ever be in ages to come. Joel 2:1-2. And then Joel transitions back by showing clearly where he ends his description of the day of the Lord, concluding with the following: For the day of the Lord is great and very dreadful, who can endure it? Joel 2:11b. Now, where this becomes interesting is in regard to Joel's discussion on the events that precede the day of the Lord. One of these events is the appearance of an army of locusts. Anyone familiar with the eschatological themes of the New Testament will instantly recognize some things from Joel's prophetic statements. Firstly, the mention of the day of the Lord being near is a dead giveaway that Joel has the end of the age in mind. This, coupled with the rest of the book of Joel, which is a series of similar statements, it is clear that Joel's book is primarily about the events that lead up to the day of the Lord. Exactly when these events occur is a little challenging to decipher, based on Joel alone that is. But when some cross-referencing is performed, things become clearer. For instance, take Joel's mention of the locusts that have lion's teeth and devour the trees and open pastures and fields with fire. The only other location in Scripture that contains anything like this is found in the book of Revelation. There, we are informed of locust-like creatures with teeth like lions arising from the abyss, who then go out to destroy and conquer under the instruction of their king, Apollyon. Now, some may interject and suggest that the locusts and the army are 2 distinct bodies or groups. After all, those with lion's teeth are described as a nation and not as insects, as an army and not arthropods. The problem with this argument, though, is that Joel links the great army, or the nation, to the locusts later so as to make it clear that they are one and the same. The nation, or the army that the Lord sends with lion's teeth, are the locusts. I will repay you for the years eaten by the locusts, the swarming locust, the young locust, the destroying locust, and the devouring locust, my great army that I sent against you. Joel 2:25. There can be no doubt the locust army is one and the same with the great nation sent against Israel just prior to the day of the Lord commencing. This interpretation is further strengthened too when one looks at what the army with lion's teeth does to the land of Israel. It lays waste my grapevine, splinters my fig tree, stripped off the bark and threw it away, and because of this, the branches have turned white. These statements have an agricultural flavor, along with a plague-like tone. The idea here is that the nation is behaving like locusts. They are using their teeth to devour the land, a theme that will crop up again within the context numerous times. And this is what locusts do. They devour and eat all of the vegetation before them. Joel's prophecy is a play on words. The locusts are not insects, as people understand the word in its colloquial sense. They are an army of spiritual beings that are devouring God's vineyard, Israel. Psalm 80, 8-10, Jeremiah 2:21, Isaiah 5, 1-30, John 15, 1-6, Matthew 21, 33-44. And the substance to these themes, the fulfillment, is located in Revelation 9, where we no longer see imagery, but the very spiritual beings that will murder that very nation. Then the fifth angel sounded his trumpet, and I saw a star that had fallen from heaven to earth, and it was given the key to the pit of the abyss. The star opened the pit of the abyss, and smoke rose out of it like the smoke of a great furnace, and the sun and the air were darkened by the smoke from the pit. And out of the smoke, locusts descended on the earth, and they were given power like that of the scorpions of the earth. They were told not to harm the grass of the earth or any plant or tree, but only those who did not have the seal of God on their foreheads. The locusts were not given power to kill them, but only to torment them for 5 months, and their torment was like the stinging of a scorpion. In those days, men will seek death and will not find it. They will long to die, but death will escape them. And the locusts look like horses prepared for battle, with something like crowns of gold on their heads and faces like the faces of men. They had hair like that of women and teeth like those of lions. They also had thoraxes like breastplates of iron, and the sound of their wings was like the roar of many horses and chariots rushing into battle. They had tails with stingers like scorpions, which had the power to injure people for 5 months. They were ruled by a king, the angel of the abyss. His name in Hebrew is Abaddon, and in Greek it is Apollyon. The first woe has passed. Behold, 2 woes are still to follow. Revelation 9, 1-12. At first glance here, it seems as though the locusts do not kill and destroy the vine of Yahweh, that these locusts only torture and do not devour the vine of the Lord. But it is important to recognize 2 things here. First, the ones that are killed by the locusts of the abyss, Apollyon and his army, are the 2 witnesses, as I argue elsewhere. I'll leave a link in the description. And because in many instances God differentiates between Israel of the flesh and Israel of promise, it is not immediately obvious whether or not Joel is referring to those with faith, the nation of faith, or the nation of flesh. It is possible, therefore, that the devouring of the grapevine and splintering of the fig tree refers to the war that Apollyon has with the saints of God in Revelation 11:7 and 13:7, and not necessarily the torture that those who remain undergo. This appears especially likely given that the harlot of Revelation, who is Israel of the flesh, Revelation 11:8, 17:18, is said to ride the beast, Revelation 7:3, not be devoured by them, at least not before the day of the Lord. This may also tie into the rejuvenation or repayment of the Lord later, who gives back what the locusts have consumed. The agricultural themes found in the scriptures are often used to refer to believers and those who are the Lord's sons. They are described as grain in Matthew 13, 24-29, 36-43, a field, 1 Corinthians 3:9, vine branches, and so on and so forth. And so the giving back of the Lord, while it could express an agricultural regeneration, it may also be hinting at a restoration of the people of the Lord at the resurrection. This is particularly likely given that Joel describes the devouring of the locusts as eating up time or years later in Joel 2:25. A loss of time or years may be hinting at a loss of life rather than just a loss of economic output or crop production. Again, it is difficult to indicate one way or the other, or perhaps that it is a both-and scenario. This is primarily because the book of Revelation certainly suggests that much of the earth will in fact be burnt up during the 7 trumpet judgments. And the 7 angels with the 7 trumpets prepared to sound them. The first angel sounded his trumpet, and hail and fire mixed with blood were hurled down upon the earth. A third of the earth was burned up, along with a third of the trees and all the green grass. Then the second angel sounded his trumpet, and something like a great mountain burning with fire was thrown into the sea. A third of the sea turned to blood, a third of the living creatures in the sea died, and a third of the ships were destroyed. Then the third angel sounded his trumpet, and a great star burning like a torch fell from heaven and landed on a third of the rivers and on the springs of water. The name of the star is Wormwood. A third of the waters turned bitter like wormwood oil, and many people died from the bitter waters. Then the fourth angel sounded his trumpet, and a third of the sun and the moon and the stars were struck. A third of the stars were darkened, a third of the day was without light, and a third of the night as well. Revelation 8, 6-12. The judgments mentioned here that take place during the war in heaven in Revelation 12, 1-9 will be devastating to the vegetation of the earth. And these judgments certainly correspond to the devastation found within Joel's prophecies too. And so, how I currently see the fulfillment of Joel's prophecies is like this. The vast bulk of the destruction within is caused by other elements located within the events that transpire at the end of the age. A good example of this is the cutting off of the sacrifices to the Lord. This is clearly alluding to the abomination of desolation, in which the Antichrist ends the sacrifices given to the Lord. He will confirm a covenant with many for 1/7. In the middle of the 7, he will put an end to sacrifice and offering, and at the temple he will set up an abomination that causes desolation, until the end that is decreed is poured out on him. Daniel 9:27. However, the destruction caused by the locusts refers to the destroying of the vineyard of the Lord, which corresponds to the murder of the saints by Apollyon, and the recovery of what the locusts have taken and devoured refers to the giving back, or the resurrection of the saints who were killed by Apollyon and his angels, the locusts. Now, whether or not I have the details exactly correct, this should not take away from the primary point of this video, mainly that the locusts, who most certainly refer to Apollyon and his unholy host of spiritual creatures that look locust-like in appearance, appear before the day of the Lord. This army, this nation, as Joel makes abundantly clear, arrives prior to the day of the Lord. In fact, a lot of the destruction mentioned within Joel's prophecies that are expressed later within the book of Revelation, within the trumpet judgments, arrive before the day of the Lord begins. This includes the destruction of vegetation, the cutting off of sacrifices to the Lord at the abomination of desolation, the lack of water for animals in Joel 1:20, famine arising in Joel 1:16-18, the nations gathering for war along with the sun and the moon turning dark, Joel 3:9-16. All of these take place before the day of the Lord commences, and given that the army of locusts clearly refers to the loosing of Apollyon from the abyss, something that takes place prior to the day of the Lord, an interesting detail emerges here. The 7 trumpets arrive before the day of the Lord, the millennium, with the first bowl of God's wrath being the moment of transition. This being the case, the book of Joel offers further support for this interpretation. This is because Joel states that the locusts, who are the spiritual creatures that arise from the abyss, arrive prior to the day of the Lord beginning, which means that the 5th trumpet takes place before the day of the Lord, the millennium, begins.